past the allotted hour, I'll declare this meeting open at 6:04 p.m. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, past and present, of the land on which we gather to conduct this meeting and pay its respects to their elders, both past and present. Kaya Naman, Kaya Yoga, Kaya Bridie, Yananuk, Nalak Kadij, Winji Alakini, Nalak Kadij, Nija, Bujabal, Wajak Nura, Kora Kora, Nijie Borowan. I have no announcements for tonight. We have an apology from Councillor Carter, who is on leave. Do we have any other apologies for tonight? No? Okay. Do we have any applications for leave? I've changed my leave that I asked for last week to this coming Friday through to Tuesday next week. Do I have a mover?
Dates for that?
It is the 26th through to the 30th.
26th of November to 30th of November. Thank you.
Do I have a mover? Councillor Wilding, a seconder. Councillor McLennan, all those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Declarations of interest, I have 3. Councillor Lithka has a proximity interest.
A
financial interest.
Yeah, so the declaration there is of interest being financial on account of being the registered proprietor of land located within the floodplain. So that relates to item 12.2. It's also a proximity interest because, as with myself, my neighbours are also located in the floodplain, so we're covering all bases.
Okay, thank you.
And in relation to that, I might add that even though I do have an interest in that, I have been given a ministerial exemption to participate in this as a councillor could, so I can both discuss and vote on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Ames has declared an impartiality interest for item 12.4. And this is due to a long-term association with Swan Districts Football Club, both as a player and a life member.
Madam Mayor, do I need to speak to that at all?
I think that's, and just to clarify, Councillor Ames can participate fully in discussion and decision making on that item. I have what is called a speculative interest in item 12.3 on the advice of the CEO. The Local Government Act does allow me to participate in that item, however on the advice of the CEO I have chosen to step out of the room for that and allow the Deputy Mayor McLennan to preside over that particular item. This arises from an interest that I expressed in a town-owned lot some 18 months ago, which may or may not come to market. It's a speculative interest as described by the Local Government Act. Okay, so moving on, we come to deputations. I have 2 deputations. The first is from Mrs. Shelley Roberts. I would ask, and the second one is from Mr. Craig Lacanis. I would ask people who are doing deputations to come and sit at the table, if we can get a chair there, and address the council. After the deputation, councillors may ask questions.
Okay. My name is Shelley Roberts. I live at 34 Railway Parade in Bassendean. I live with my partner Lisa and our daughter, who's 17 months old. My comments relate to agenda item 12.9 regarding a traffic management request on Railway Parade. We have experienced speeding and hooning drivers on our street since we bought our property 7 years ago. In 2019, we actively commenced raising our concerns with the town and the police. Since then, the town has undertaken 2 periods of traffic monitoring, which have both revealed data supporting the fact that speed is a significant issue on the street, and I understand that a summary of that most recent data is before the council tonight. The first period of traffic monitoring, the town provided this data to the police, which I understand is part of their process for their action. However, I've never seen police monitoring traffic on our street, and when I followed this up with the town, they were unable to provide any information on whether or not the police had taken any action. I also requested, during this period of time, I've requested the town seek to erect signs indicating that the speed is 50 kilometres an hour on our street. There are no signs currently. I was advised by the town that it's not main roads, that's a responsibility of main roads, and it's not their policy to put signs up anymore because drivers generally understand that in built-up areas they should be driving 50 kilometres an hour, but the data indicates obviously that people don't understand that on our street. Speeding isn't the only issue. Drivers use the open stretch of road to do prolonged burnouts in the middle of the night, all hours of the day. There have been many occasions when my baby has woken screaming in fear of the noise that the cars make. When I raised this with the town, I was advised that hooning is a police issue. Working for the state government, I mean, in my role, I'm a public servant. I understand that different agencies have different areas of responsibility. But to date, and over the 2 years that I've raised the concerns, no agency, including the town, has taken any action in relation to this issue. This month, a toddler was killed on a Perth street due to a speeding driver in a built-up residential road like Railway Parade. When the Minister for Transport, Rita Saffioti, was interviewed, she was asked if speed on the street was a known issue. I don't want for the same question to be asked if someone was to be injured or killed on Railway Parade, and the answer to be yes. It was a known issue, but no action was taken. Given that the data indicates that majority of the drivers are driving 10 kilometres or more than the legal limit on the road, and the road receives over 3,000 vehicles driving on it every day, the speed issue presents a significant and frequent risk to the community. The shared cycle path has heightened the risk as many more people are trying to enjoy that space, and many of the people access that space from the adjoining streets by attempting to cross the road. My concerns have been exacerbated by the recent opening of the Nido Daycare Centre at the end of Railway Parade. This, I anticipate, will cause more traffic, and given the statistics, more traffic means more people speeding. But it also increases the amount of foot traffic around the area. I live on 34 Railway Parade. I'm probably about 3 houses down from Lord Street. People turn down Lord Street, the road goes downhill. They accelerate quickly down the road, and people that live that end of Lord Street, when attempting to cross the road, are in danger of not being able to get out of the way or if a driver doesn't see them. I'm also concerned that one day one of these speeding drivers is going to lose control of their vehicle and plough into people that are walking and trying to use the shared cycle path. Families use it with their children, professional cyclists are using it. I love living in Bassendean, and we look forward to raising our daughter here, but this issue really does affect our ability to fully enjoy our home safely and without fear. I think that I did have a quick look at the traffic management policy, the new one that's being proposed, and I think that Railway Parade meets all of the criteria for traffic management treatment, and I think that the two proposals that have been put forward in relation to speed cushions and some level of signage are required. I think that the evidence is before the council that people are speeding and they're speeding quite regularly, so I just request that the council support both of those recommendations. You've got the power to make those decisions tonight, and I hope that my comments can be taken into consideration when you do make those decisions. Thank you.
Councillors, do you have questions? No? Okay, thank you very much. The second deputation is from Mr. Lakanis. This is relating to item 12.2. Welcome, Mr. Lakanis.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for taking my deputation this evening. So, to the councillors, contrary to the Development Officer's assertion in its report to the councillors in tonight's agenda, it has not been demonstrated that all of the elements otherwise captured in LPP4 have been addressed by the provisions contained within the draft SP 2.9. Both LPP4 and its draft amendment state that proposed development in the flood fringe to simply be acceptable, subject to appropriate building conditions that will achieve adequate flood protection. It's entirely unsatisfactory for the Development Office to presume that the term acceptable, which is informed by DEWA, is inconsequential, moot, or unworthy of highlighting in its analysis for this council. It is not moot to those who have invested in the flood fringe, informed by LPP4 and the observance that over many decades, not a single subdivision application or granny flat proposal has been rejected by the town based on DEWA advice. The town is about to revoke its own local policy on development in the floodplain to adopt a draft state level policy with no similar statement of guarantee of acceptability, nor apparently a desire to influence its final form. Under draft SPP 2.9, residential lots with an area and density coding making them subdividable will not necessarily be able to be subdivided, and the building of a granny flat will not necessarily be acceptable. Purportedly to lower evacuation risk, DEWA will apply development criteria that cannot be met in large parts of the Bassendean flood fringe, given existing access road heights. It is most unlikely that the town, together with the main roads, will raise heights to meet the criteria. Even to do so would create an issue for existing homes and lots to access roads similarly that are raised. Under the draft, development applications will be determined on an individual case-by-case basis, and it's entirely untenable proposition for road heights to be raised by the developer of an individual lot. The following facts are highly relevant. In Bassendean's entire history, nobody has ever died through flooding, no building occupant, no emergency responder. Old housing has gradually been replaced by flood compliant construction with habitable floor heights above the 1 in 100 year flood level. And 3, flooding in Bassendean has always been predictable and slow, and now projected to be somewhat lower in level under the EMRC Swan River flooding report, which considered all factors including rising sea level. There are days of warning before inundation, and the window for evacuation is long. On item 4 on page 35 of SPP 2.9 refers to the application of Australian Disaster Resilience Guideline 7.3, flood hazard. This document presumes a rush to evacuation that does not apply to the Bassendean situation, and to an evacuation route road network criteria applicable where flooding isolation is fast, such as in northern parts of Australia. It is inconsistent with the facts 1 to 3 that to apply the criteria to evacuation risk in Bassendean. All development proposals in the flood fringe should remain acceptable, protecting private investments informed by LPP4 for decades. This is not to suggest any increase in development density coding to encourage development, but the honouring of what has already been determined by the town as informed by DEWA's past stance. It's unfair on landowners affected to do otherwise. DEWA has made a similar previous error of judgment. Decades ago, it delineated a floodway with a heavy stroke of its pen, removing development rights of landowners falling within it. On the 8th of October this year, after several years of extremely unsatisfactory dealings with DEWA by the affected residents, it was finally forced to acknowledge its error. It remapped the land to again fall within the flood fringe. The recalculation was based not on new flood data leading to lower projections of flooding, but on the data originally applied to delineating the floodway decades ago. DEWA's heavy hand is again being applied to retrospectively snuffing the development rights of landowners. This time the town must defend its residents rather than falling in behind DEWA. SPP 2.9 must honour the Bassendean situation. This is achievable through the adoption of a bespoke criteria recognising our benign flooding and history of no fatalities, rather than generic criteria applicable to fast flooding isolation situations. There exists no sound basis to remove the presumption of development acceptance existing in LPP4 that has informed the town's density coding and planning decisions and private investment for decades. I presented at the October 26 briefing session alerting you to a loss of development acceptability in the flood fringe. I asked you to plan how you would fight this attack. At that meeting, John Gangel received a plaque for 16 years of service on council, 8 years as mayor. He related the time when Bassendean vehemently told the state where to place its plan to merge Bassendean with Bayswater. This is a time for a display of similar gumption. Unnecessary and unfair constriction of development affects both individual landowners and the town. I asked you each to decide whether you see yourself as an extension of a seemingly callous and heavy-handed bureaucracy, or as representatives of people who place their trust in you to protect them and the town's interests. I'll table that, and if you need a copy I can provide. So I will take any questions that you may have.
Councillors, anyone would like to ask a question of Mr. Lakanis? Councillor Lithgow.
How long have you been a resident of Bassendean?
Since 1999.
And what is your occupation?
A school teacher.
And whereabouts is that?
It's currently at Cyril Jackson. When I first moved to Bassendean, I was at Scotch College and commuted.
So pretty extensive connection to Bassendean.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions, councillors? Thank you, Mr. Lakanis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so statements by members of the public on agenda items. This is restricted to 15 minutes unless by resolution of council decides otherwise to extend that time. Each person is restricted to one statement of up to 2 minutes unless the council by decision determines that they may speak for another further 2 minutes. Statements can be submitted prior to the council meeting via our website or to the council administration. It should be noted that our meetings are recorded and live streamed via YouTube, and that there is no protection from legal action being taken against you should it arise that your comments delivered at this meeting. So I have a written statement that's been presented by Mr. Dennis, the CEO of Swan Districts. That written statement has been circulated to all the councillors. So I won't read that out. It's rather a long statement. And I believe the staff have actually been provided with that statement as well. So now I also have two requests for statements. The first one is from Mr. Don Yates. Mr. Yates, if you would like to come up.
Thank you. Good evening, Don Yates, 10 Thompson Road, Success Hill. Just a few comments, if I may, about the 12.2, I think it is, the master plan, the town centre master plan. The town of Bassendean has been toing and froing with designs for almost 2 decades that I'm aware of, that I've contributed to. In the days of Greg Peterson when he was mayor in 2003, there was around about 15, 20 people in this room discussing planning issues. That led on to the infill when the Wame site became a higher density site just northwest of the Bassendean station. And what really comes down to, with all the changing state government policies, I think it's getting to the time with something like the town centre master plan that the town actually has to accept what officers like Donna Shaw has put together in summary, and moved forward from that point. And I think in that context, you know, we're getting to the stage of the red cone. In other words, if there's things like one-way roads that need to be considered, we actually go and have a period where we put cones down on the road for a month or whatever, or parking restrictions or whatever, and we actually try it with people. And if they like it, then we make it more formal. If they don't like it, then there's discussion about it. When Landcorp came to Bassendean, in 2016, there was something like 31 members of the community involved with the community working group. So they were going to limit it to about 8 people, if I remember rightly at the beginning. But when so many people expressed interest in getting involved, that's when it went up to 31 people in that discussion to do with Landcorp coming to Bassendean. Now, I'm not saying what is right or wrong or whatever, but if you look at, for example, the 3 aspects of the 12.2, one, do we accept the town centre master plan? And I think we've got to get to a point where we do.
Can I wind you up a bit?
That's all right, 30 seconds. The second point is, do we invite the state government agencies to come to town, which is basically the second part of the motion, and I think we do. And the third part is to say there are creative people out there in the development world who also should be invited to come to Bassendean. You know, the town is running a little bit behind in its housing targets, so we need encouragement
Mr.
and
Yates,
excitement.
I'm not sure that that's a correct statement.
What is incorrect?
Well, you're making a statement there that has no basis in fact at the moment. So
Which bit do you question?
which bit is we're running behind in our housing targets?
If, Madam Mayor, I refer you to tables 9 and 10 of the State Planning Policy 4.2 that was issued in March 2018, and currently we're running something like 38% behind what the targets were set down by Tomorrow WA, which is part of the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage. I would suggest you go and check your facts. All right?
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Yates. Take a seat with your cone. Okay. Now, we had a written submission from Duncan and Gloria Scanlon. Now, I understand that you, even though you've submitted a written submission, that you would actually like to speak to this. Is that correct?
I think, did you want me to use the mic?
Yes, if you could. And if you could state your name and address, that would be
Yes,
great.
my name is Gloria Scanlon, and both Duncan and myself live at 50 Railway Parade. Let me thank you all this evening, and I particularly wanted to thank one of our former speakers who was also a resident of Railway Parade and spoke at length regarding the traffic hazard situation. I wrote a short submission because I wasn't, I was putting this forward to hopefully have speed bumps incorporated at the time the road surfacing is taking place on Railway Parade, which is right at the moment. I'll just read a couple of paragraphs from this. Most of the first part, I believe you all have a copy of what I've written. It's fairly to the point. Probably I'd get to paragraph 3, which says, as you are probably aware, there are a series of speed bumps along Anzac Terrace in order to slow local traffic. This does not carry anywhere near the volume of traffic that comes along Railway Parade. The speeds often reached along here are indeed frightening, and along with the dip in the road between 4th and 5th Avenue to where we are located at 50 Railway Parade makes backing out a hazard, as there is very limited vision of the cars coming down the road. Many years ago, a friend's child was struck by a car in front of our house. He spent many months in hospital as a result of this, and more recently, I believe it was sometime last year, an elderly gentleman on a gopher was also struck near the subway entrance on Railway Parade and was taken off in an ambulance. As a result, had there been speed bumps, this may not have occurred. Hoping speed bumps can be implicated as a safety measure for the benefit of the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Scanlon. I believe a copy of this has been distributed again to all councillors and also to the staff. Thank you very much. I'd ask if there are any other members of the public who'd like to make statements. Yes, sir.
I would, Madam Chair, this is not...
would you come to the microphone, sir, and
it's
state
not,
your name
it's
and
not
address?
Terry Blanchard, 5 Devon Road. It's not linked to the question time, is it? This
No,
is-
question time follows.
Okay, mine's a personal thing, and I presented quite a lot of data to a special electors meeting on the 31st of August. In doing that, I apologised at the start and said, look, I'm not aiming at any officer or councillor or anybody, but people close to me said that one of the young ladies in the room that night, and I think it was the manager of Place and Development, I don't want to mention names, but I understand from my close associates that the young lady was quite stressed on the night. Now, other people have said to me, oh, she's just got to learn to toughen up. No. If I may, Madam,
Mr. Blanchard,
my thing is to make an apology to that lady, because it was never my intention in my presentation on that night to be or upsetting any officer at any level in this council, and I am quite happy on the public record to say to her, I'm very sorry. What I presented that night was definitely not to upset you on that night or cause you any distress.
thank you, Mr. Blanchard.
Yeah.
I think we are very lucky in this council to have some excellent staff who are talented and award-winning staff, in fact. So I have to say that I am very pleased with some of the staff that we've got on board, because they provide an excellent level of information to councillors to enable us to make good decisions. Are there any other members of... Thank you, ma'am. Would you come to the microphone, state your name and address?
My name is Leanne Spadaccini. I live at 10 Devon Road. I'm a neighbour. I want to refer to item 12.5 in the agenda for tonight's meeting. I'm just new to the area and heard through the grapevine that there were going to be changes to the parking restrictions and signage on my street. And one of the reasons I moved to the area was so that I could be closer to all my friends and family, and they could call in quite easily and visit me. And I'm hoping that they can park on the street outside my home. I wonder whether the proposal that, when I read through the notes, the proposal is to amend the existing sign restrictions on Devon Road North from no parking 8 AM to 6 PM Saturday, March to August, to no parking at all on Saturdays and Sundays. I don't think the proposal has considered the risk associated for me as with my family and anyone who's coming to visit me. Weekends all year round would place limits on the use of my property. For example, it may be illegal for residents to park on Devon Road North on Christmas Day and New Year's Day, days when usually you get lots of visitors. Additional parking restrictions may put, if I was to park illegally just for a moment outside my home, just dropping off something or someone coming by, I'm not sure whether I'm covered for insurance if that was the case. And I'm concerned that, if any residents in my street are holding gatherings at their homes will be subject to these restrictions, and it would unduly impact the amenity of my property. Verge parking is not always the answer. It only allows for 1 or 2 vehicles. And I'd really like my friends and families to be able to visit me more easily and not be restricted by parking or put an undue burden on people on the other side of the road. And whilst I understand that the council needs to consider all views, I would like maybe a more balanced approach and maybe not such a broad brush approach to the parking, and you know, maybe it not being all Saturday and Sunday, but maybe still having something similar to what we have now, where it's only particular days or particular times, not all day Saturday and Sunday. And I think a more balanced approach is I would like the council to consider, and I'd like to thank you for allowing me to address you today, to the Mayor and to all the council members, and yeah, I'm new, so I might see it shot.
Thank you. I was thinking of asking the officer if he wanted to we'll leave it until the item comes before council. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to? Yes, ma'am.
Janet Matthews, 50 Devon Road, Bassendean, and I live on the corner of West Road and Bassendean. I'd just like to say this is the last council meeting when the parking on Devon Road and West Road was considered. I've taken particular notice of the parking that's occurring on Devon Road. In fact, most days I've gone at different times. I've walked in the morning and I've walked down midday and I drove down tonight at 5 o'clock. The most I've seen parked on Devon Road were three cars parked outside number 47 3 days ago, and number 47's on the south side and has plants all over the verge, so there's nowhere else to park. Today there were no cars at any time that I looked down or drove down. Most days there's about 2 or 3 parents who park just back from West Road on the south side of Devon Road to pick up their children from school. And basically there's no parking in West Road. I have people who park on my verge, some of the parents. I'm quite happy for that because I used to be a school teacher and school principal, so I've got no objection to people looking after their children. But I really question the real reason for why this issue of parking on Devon Road is such an issue with the council. The only thing I can think of is to control football parking. And even with football, usually football season lasts for 24 weeks or so if you play in finals. The waffle, I'm not sure exactly what that is, but you play every second week at home. And I wonder why it can't be like it used to be in the olden days, where there were signs up saying no parking between this at this time. And, you know, it just seems a ridiculous impost on most of the residents of the roads to not have any access, just as that young lady said, in her situation, which is different, I agree, but that there's such an urgency for this situation, which I believe doesn't exist. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've reached 15 minutes, so if there are no other residents who wish to make statements, we'll move on to public question time.
Madam Mayor, I know that we may have reached the 15-minute mark, but that's no sort of line in the sand. So if anyone else does want to speak in regards to this opportunity for statement time, then I advise you to stand up and have a yarn, if that's obviously appropriate for everyone on council.
It is indeed. Are there any other residents who wish to speak? Otherwise, we will move on to public question time. Okay, so public question time. Again, we allocate 15 minutes for members of the public. If you have a question, please raise your hand, come to the microphone, state your name and address, and ask your question. No? Was that a hand over there? So no? So we have no one in the audience. Ah, yes, we do. Okay. Mr. Blanchard.
Terry Blanchard, 5 Devon Road. The question I want to ask is of the officers, probably not the CEOs. The designation within the road hierarchy of the section of Railway Parade from Lord Street down to the railway station? What's its designation? Is it a local distributor, district distributor, or what?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's a district distributor.
District, not local.
No, it's a local distributor. Sorry, Lord Street's a district distributor, but Railway Parade's a local
Is
distributor.
local.
Yeah.
And can I just ask, because the young lady, I apologise, I'm half deaf, she mentioned 85th percentile traffic speeds. What were they in Railway Parade?
Through you, Madam Mayor, they range, the two locations we looked at were, I think 61.2 kilometres an hour and about 56.5 kilometres an hour.
And are you aware, Madam CEO, that over the latest public accident statistics from the Main Roads Department, in 5 years there's been 10 accidents at the Lord Street Railway Parade intersection, which I presume is under the jurisdiction of this town. Am I correct?
Thank you. Mr. Yates.
Thank you. Don Yates, 10 Thompson Road, Success Hill. Did any councillors see the ABC 7:30 report last night?
No.
No, all right. Basically, Alan Kohler in his economic report mentioned various points. One of them was that the cost of housing in the last 20 years has gone up between 3.5 and 4 times, compared to a base figure in the 2002-2003 period. And also with that, the fact that salaries have only gone up by about 20%. Now, what is this town doing to address what is really a housing crisis, not only for Australia, but more locally for Perth, more locally for Bassendean? Thank you. Nobody can afford housing when it goes up by that sort of factor.
Mr. Yates, I understand that you have posed this question multiple times in writing and in different ways. There have been numerous responses to your questions in the past. Clearly the town is progressing planning for the local planning scheme and strategies and the town centre master plan. There is progress in this area. I'm sure you won't agree that it's moving fast enough for your liking, but this current council and the previous council have certainly made more headway in the last 3 years than what has gone before. So I would ask you to be patient as we move into a stage of getting things moving. So there's clearly a significant amount of work to be done in this area, and I think that the change of administration 3 years ago, the change of many of the staff that you see before you now has resulted in progress in that area. And I would ask you to be patient. I know that you don't feel like we are doing the work, but we are. So thank you very much. Are there any other questions from members of the public? Mr. Blanchard, you're a repeat performer.
I'm only here on one issue, Madam Mayor, and I will tread on eggshells tonight. And I'll ask the question specifically to the CEO and yourself. I don't care how they're answered, but I'll ask them in that direction. Madam CEO, the audio that you mentioned at the start of the meeting that is on the website for people to listen to, does that form part of the official record of the proceedings of council meetings and council briefings?
Is that combined with the minutes of the meeting?
Okay. As CEO, would you expect the community of the town of Bassendean and the wider community entering the town of Bassendean to abide by the resolutions, laws and local laws adopted by the council.
If they're lawful. If they're lawful.
The CEO, are you aware that item 12.5 of tonight's agenda?
Mr. Blanchard, it is supposed to be 2 questions before we throw it open. I'll allow you this last question.
No, I'm happy for somebody else to go and I'll come back.
Do we have any other members of the public who'd like to ask a question? In which case, Mr. Blanchard, I'll allow you to ask this last question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The reason for the questioning is to get some information that was put to the special electors meeting on the public record tonight. That's what this is about. So if you look at the agenda of 12.5 of tonight's agenda and the deferred report on the 22nd of June 2001, there has been no reference until this agenda about people complaining about the parking around Bassendean Oval. Even at the briefing last week, the red writing under audit was not there. It came in this week. Can you explain when it says that that's why the audit was done, why all the letters and all the documents that this town has put out up until tonight did not refer to any complaints by residents?
So, Mr. Gibson.
Through Madam Mayor, the question was asked by a councillor last Tuesday, and the undertaking given was that the report would be updated to effectively answer the question, and that is why it's been added to the report for this week.
So supplementary to the meeting, a councillor asked after the briefing for you to put that into the agenda. Because
Mr.
if you...
Blanchard,
Yep.
I believe that the question was asked during the briefing. That's why we have briefing sessions the week before an OCM, so that councillors can ask questions of the staff, and out of those questions, if there's additional information, it is then provided in the documents for the OCM. So I do believe that I have been very fair in allowing you to ask all these questions. Might I suggest that we move on in the agenda, because this item will be considered by staff and the councillors. Mr. Blanchard, you seem to be wanting to ask more questions.
Yes.
I think that we have been very generous in allowing you to ask so many questions.
Madam Mayor, are you stopping me from asking the questions on behalf of other residents?
No, I think we have actually hit the 15 minutes, so I'm going to have to ask councillors if someone would like to extend the question time. Councillor Ames, seconded. Councillor Plifka. All those in favour? That's carried. Now you may ask a question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Sorry, there's procedures,
Yeah, it's all procedural, I understand that. Can I just ask very quickly, other than that one change, has any other changes been made between the briefing session and tonight's agenda on this particular item? Is the recommendations as they were last week?
I don't believe so, but I will ask the officer.
Through Madam Mayor, for this particular item, that's the only change. There have been changes to other items, but they are similarly identified.
Not interested in other items. Okay.
Your second question into the new 15 minutes, Mr. Blanchard.
The second, as the CEO, are you aware that item 12.5 on tonight's agenda has no resolutions relating to the Guildford Road, North Road traffic speeds, the problems with the West Road parking bays near the Bassendean Primary School, extra parking to offset the loss of bays with the new restrictions, and the use of traffic management devices such as chicanes with trees to be planted in those devices?
Is that a statement or a question?
It's a question. Are you aware that there's no resolutions to those effect, which council asked for on the 22nd of June 2021?
I have to take
fine.
If I might add to that, Mr. Blanchard, I believe that the original deferment of this item, I think it was July, the
Right.
request was for staff to investigate those items.
Yep.
It was not a resolution of council as such. It was simply asking staff to provide some additional information on those items. So, and I suspect that you're going to comment that there is not a great deal of information in the agenda regarding that. However, there are some items which, for instance, the signage against the school in West Road, my understanding is that the formatting of that signage, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, through the officer, that is mandated by State Government Department. Is that correct?
That's correct, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Mr. Blanchard.
Yep.
I'm
Madam
going
Mayor?
to allow you one more question, and then
Right.
I'm going to ask you to sit down, sir.
No. Can I ask the CEO, the changes to the parking restrictions recommended by the officers in 12.5 for the benefit of the football public, the residents in the streets in question, or for the benefit of the town of Bassendean administration?
Through Madam Mayor, it is a balance of all three. It's an environment that is shared by patrons of the football ground, the residents of the area, other visitors to the area, and is regulated by the town. So it is in staff's view, a balanced approach to a reasonably difficult issue. It is open to the council to resolve as recommended, or there's any number of other options available to the council if it's not comfortable with staff recommendation.
Mr. Blanchard?
Then if the restrictions are of benefit to the ratepayers and the
Mr.
residents,
Blanchard,
Mr.
Mr. Blanchard, sorry.
you're gagging us.
I'm actually indicating to you that we have had conversations on the telephone, we have had many discussions about this item. I would appreciate if you respect the fact that we are in a formal setting. I would ask you to sit down so that we can proceed with the meeting. I am a new mayor, clearly, and I think I have been very generous in allowing you to ask multiple questions. But we do seem to be rehashing here, and I would very much like to proceed with the meeting so that we can actually get the councillors to ask their questions as well.
Well, Madam Mayor, if I can ask one more question, based on what was said there,
Mr.
if it's for the residents' benefit, can you explain how putting in a 24-hour, 12 months of the year restriction benefits the residents in the streets with the yellow lines, and also for the lady there, how does it benefit those on the north side of Devon Road to have no parking any weekend in a whole year?
Thank you, Mr. Blanchard. Okay. So with that, I'm going to close public question time. We'll move on to item 8, which is petitions. I don't believe there are any petitions. Okay. And then we'll move on to item 9, which is confirmation of the minutes. We've got 9.1, that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 2nd November be received. Do I have a mover for that item? Councillor McLennan, a seconder. Councillor Wilding. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. I think Councillor Clifton. Yes. Okay. Item 9.1b, that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on 2nd November be confirmed as a true record. Councillor McWilliams, seconded. Councillor McLennan. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. There is no business deferred from a previous meeting, which means we move on to item 11.1, and that is receipt of external committee and now move on to adoption of recommendations en bloc. So coming out of en bloc, I have item 12.4 and item 12.9. So for consideration tonight, we have 12.4, 12.9, sorry, 12.4, 12.2, 12.3, 12.5, 12.6, 12.8, 12.9, 12.10, 12.13, and then we go into confidential business, which is 16.1 and 16.2. So, do we have any other items to come out of en bloc? So, can I have a mover to move the remaining items en bloc? We have Councillor.
Just for the, can you just specify the ones that are going to be en bloc, Madam Mayor?
Okay, so en bloc, we're moving item 12.7.
Yep.
12.11. 12.2, 12.12, 12.14 and 12.15. Oh, apologies. 12.15 has to come out as well because there's a slight amendment to that item.
Okay.
So we are only moving 4 items, 12.7, 12.11, 12.12 and 12.14. Have a mover, Councillor McLennan, seconded Councillor Ames. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. We'll now move on to item 12.2, and if I could ask the officer to speak to this if required, if you think necessary.
Through you, Madam Mayor, this item has been to Council previously, but happy to take questions from
And councillors, I have Councillor McLennan would like to ask a question.
Thank you. Mr Gibson, I just was seeking the staff to clarify a couple of statements that were made by Mr Lakanis during his deputation. So one of the things that he spoke about was the loss of development potential as a result of the state planning policy. So if you were able to make some comment on that. But also there seemed to be an assumption about the relationship between the state planning policy and the local planning policy, and I was just wondering if you would mind speaking to the interaction between those two, please.
Through you, Madam Mayor, in terms of the relationship between the state level policies and the local level policies, there is an obligation for the town to ensure that its policies are consistent, or at least not inconsistent, with state level policies. And one of the reasons staff are recommending this policy be revoked is that there is now a state planning policy where there wasn't before. LPP4 filled a policy void for a period, but that policy void has effectively been otherwise dealt with via draft SPP9. In terms of the suggestion that development rights are being extinguished, or words to that effect, the policy is a mechanism to guide decision making in relation to subdivision and development and a raft of other matters, but for the purpose of the current level of interest is subdivision and development principally. The local planning policy does not guarantee any approval. It is a policy measure which guides the determination of such applications, but doesn't in of itself guarantee an outcome. In addition, the draft SPP doesn't have a presumption, or doesn't strictly rule against development. One of the, if I can read something to councillors for their benefit. In the guidelines in relation to planning and development in flood-prone land, it states that proposals on land located in the flood fringe may be acceptable subject to achieving a minimum habitable floor level of 0.5 metres above the expected 1% AEP flood event and appropriate emergency management controls. So the policy and the associated guidelines still contemplate development possibly occurring, but obviously each application will need to be assessed on its individual merits, but that is the case at present under LPP4.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Plifka.
I've got a few questions. I might just follow on from that passage that you just read from the guidelines to the draft state planning policy. The next sentence in that paragraph, do you have that to hand? Can you read that and explain what that might mean?
The one, through Madam Mayor, the one referring to the cumulative impact?
Yes.
In flood fringe areas, the cumulative impact of development has already been considered and no additional assessment of afflux resulting from a proposal is required. However, appropriate vertical separation, safe access and evacuation procedures and provision of an adequate waterway foreshore area must be demonstrated. And it goes on to set some parameters about a water management report.
So is that granting some sort of a concession in relation to the flood fringe, saying that cumulative effects have already been taken into account?
Through Madam Mayor, yes, that's the way we would interpret it.
Right. Because there's just a few different definitions floating around. Now there's the flood fringe mapping. I think previously under the LPP4, prior to it being amended, it indicated that flood fringe was the area where I think it said something to the effect that development was generally acceptable. I think that was the definition under the LPP4.
Through Madam Mayor, the existing LPP4, that's distinct from the LPP4 that was advertised for comment, states flood defines flood fringe as the part of the floodplain where proposed development is considered hydrologically acceptable, but is subject to appropriate building conditions that will achieve adequate flood protection.
There's a number of things going on. Firstly, there's transitioning from the existing policy to the draft policy. So just so we can understand how that occurred for new councillors that may not have been involved in that process, the submissions that are attached to the agenda, so what people were saying wanted to occur, is that upon them receiving the draft LP4, or do those submissions inform the way in which the draft LP4 has been put together?
Through Madam Mayor, the former. So it was in response, Council resolved to adopt the policy for the purpose of advertising. Advertising occurred and those submissions were received in response.
Right, so say the estate planning policy weren't to have come along and come to the impact of that, what's likely to have occurred is that the draft LP4 would have come before Council in its rather, I suppose, condensed form compared to the existing one, and then once the estate planning policy came along, then the language seems pretty similar. So we're essentially operating from the basis that the local planning policy was, as amended, is substantially the same as the estate planning policy. Is that?
Through Madam Mayor, yes, that's broadly correct. If SPP 2.9 hadn't have materialised,
yes,
we would have still brought a report back to Council to consider the submissions in response to the advertising, but we wouldn't have been dealing with a higher order framework. Ours would have been the only framework, and therefore we needed to make that as functional as possible. But I suppose the dynamic has changed by virtue of a higher order framework materialising.
And just in terms of the older policy, I mean, I know a lot of the debate has been around subdivisional potential. There were aspects of the older policy which were not facilitating development. They were essentially restricting what could be done. So somebody that was, say, interested in living in that particular area might say that they were attracted to cycling fencing, or the fact that the housing had to be sympathetic to vegetation and things of that nature. How do we reintroduce that? Is that appropriate to go into a different policy, or how do we ensure that coverage continues?
Through you, Madam Mayor, if that was important to councillors, it may well need a different policy setting. I suppose that hasn't been something that has been raised as a major issue. Most of the discussion has centred around development potential, subdivision potential and the like. So if that was something council wished to advance, staff can certainly review it, but there's nothing to suggest that is of particular importance to landowners in that area.
But in the interim, there could be, as you said, policy vacuum whereby the only thing, if somebody were to seek a subdivision and development, if we were to completely exit this space, it would just be subject to them satisfying the conditions in the new state planning policy. So that's say they were to effect a subdivision, and then when it came to the actual development, it wouldn't have to be constrained in the way that it currently is. But as you said, people haven't expressed a view on that. But I'm just wondering if that's something which going forward might be a point of discussion where those guidelines, so that people know what the ambience of that area will be, where they would be put in future.
Through Madam Mayor, yes, that could certainly be reviewed. Like I say, it hasn't been presented as a major issue of contention thus far, but if Council has an appetite to put other parameters in place as distinct from the flooding controls, that's something staff could certainly look into.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from councillors? Now I understand, Councillor Polifka, that you have provided it's got an extra dot point to the officer's recommendation. So would you care to read out that additional dot point?
Yeah, well, certainly for the motion which is being, once that is, somebody is to put that, the amendment which I would seek to add is that. So do we first need a mover and a seconder for that before I can amend it?
Sorry. Yes, you can move the officer's recommendation with that.
Oh, I'd probably move the amendment, so I'll see if so I can speak to that.
I'm finding it hard to hear you.
I'll move the amendment, but I'll leave the actual item for somebody else to move and second that.
Okay. Sorry, I did have some trouble hearing there. So you're moving the officer's recommendation? No.
I just foreshadowing that once that is moved, I will be seeking to move an amendment.
So
we can discuss the amendment.
So I'm asking if anyone is moving the officer's recommendation. Councillor Wilding, seconded Councillor William. Sorry. We have a mover and a seconder for the officer's recommendation. Councillor Plefko, would you like to actually move your amendment?
Yes, so we can have a discussion and vote on that. So yeah, the amendment that I'm proposing is based on what we've heard from the administration. We feel that there needs to be a document which gives guidance and certainty to the extent that it can be given to the residents or potential residents. So the amendment I'm seeking to move would be phrased as such, which is request the Chief Executive Officer to prepare an information sheet in respect of subdivision and development within flood-affected areas to be made publicly available on the town's website.
So I would ask the mover if, okay, so we have a seconder for that, okay? Okay.
So shall I speak to that, or as
I have no idea. Okay, so we'll proceed. So we have a mover for the officer's recommendation, a seconder. We have a mover and a seconder for the amendment, point number 3.
so unless the
Councillor McLennan. Sorry, I thought you got that.
I'm not always looking up, so if I don't have a name, I don't get it down. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think what could occur is if the mover and the seconder of the officer's recommendation were prepared to absorb the amendment into the substantive, then that would alleviate the need for discussion.
We're doing it slightly differently to what I'm used to. But anyway, so Councillor Wilding, do you accept the...
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I thought you would. Okay. Do we have anyone against? No.
Just against the, I suppose we went from a policy which was quite expansive, and I understand the administration's comments that there are certain things which were promised in the old policy which couldn't necessarily be conveyed. You probably should let the...
Yes. Sorry, I was thinking, we're not in debate. Anyway, okay, now...
Madam Mayor, maybe you can ask the seconder if she accepts the amendment.
Seconder, yes. Okay. So, do we have anyone against? No. So,
So the yeah, you need to speak to it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Broadly, this is an item that's been considered by Council for roughly a month now. This is the second meeting it's come to. I believe that Council has raised a number of questions on the item, and they've all been answered in a way that is, to my expectations, satisfactorily. I do respect the points raised by Mr. Lucanis in regards to the possible concerns, though through the responses from the administration, I believe that those concerns are adequately met, and I move the motion.
Councillor,
No.
you waive your right to speak. Okay. Councillor Olivka.
It's time. Yes. So just going on from what I've said previously, is that and it has been identified that by administration that the policy that was in existence, the LPP4, perhaps promised things which were not necessarily things which a local government could promise. So I've been informed that what's happened is we're trying to bring the current policy back into line with the way in which things could be, or should be rather. I suppose my concerns are the previous policy was a bit more prescriptive and informative as to what people could in fact do. I mean, I understand that from an administration point of view, with all their knowledge of town planning, that a lot of these matters that are in there would to them appear superfluous, but just in terms of the approach that a resident or potential resident might take, just to have a document which could guide them. So it's not a criticism of administration. It's just that it would have been the case that if we could have retained the policy to the extent that we could, and I understand that might have been a very scant policy, but just to give people guidelines, and that then feeds into the amendment, which I think if everyone's not of the mind to refuse the revocation, that at least having a document which can provide a level of guidance to residents and potential residents. So that's my chief objection.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers for or against? Okay. So I'm putting this motion with including the amendment. Are there all those in favour? And against? Did you get that, Amy? Yes, thank you. Okay. Okay. Moving on. Item 12.3, I have to invite the Deputy Mayor to step into the role, and I'm sure she'll do a better job than I just did. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor, so on item 12.3 now, which is the social housing economic recovery package. Before we consider the item, are there any questions for the town's staff? No questions? So we have an officer recommendation before us, and councillors have an alternative proposed by Councillor Wiley. If anybody would like to move either of them or something else. Councillor Wiley?
I would like to move my motion, please, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Would you mind reading it out for everybody, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. The motion is that Council does not lodge an application for the Social Housing Economic Recovery Package grant from the Department of Communities for the town-owned property at 110 Lot 122 Hamilton Street, Bassendean. And point 2, request the CEO to explore other opportunities for the future incorporation of social housing into developments within the town centre on sites under government control, including 35 Old Perth Road and the Wilson Street car park.
Thank you. Do you have that? Yes, thank you. Okay, is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Olivka. Are there any questions on that alternative for the staff?
Not to the staff, but to you, Deputy.
To me.
Yeah, just in regards to point number 3, is that not inclusive in the proposed?
So Councillor Wilding's just moved those 2 points. I think the third point you're referring to was a point that was circulated previously.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. No.
Provided.
My mistake. Thank you.
Okay then, so we've got a mover and a seconder. Is there anybody against the motion? So all those in favour? That is carried unanimously. And would somebody like to invite Councillor Hamilton back in? Would you like to provide the reasons now or after the meeting to this?
After the meeting.
Thank you for that. We now move on to item 12.4, Town Centre Master Plan. So, yourself speaking to this, or Mr. Gibson? Mr. Gibson, you would like to speak to this at all?
Through Madam Mayor, I gave a reasonably comprehensive introduction last Tuesday, so simply happy to take questions from councillors.
Okay, so councillors, I'm assuming there are questions on this item. Councillor Polifka, and I apologise, Councillor Polifka, I actually didn't quite hear what you were saying before, so I do apologise.
No, I can speak up, that's not an issue. Town Centre Master Plan. So we'll start with probably a relatively easy question, I'm hoping. In relation to the intersection of Old Perth Road and Guildford Road, I think as it currently stands, we've effectively got one-way traffic, so not being able to turn in. In terms of the options for that, and I think the master plan sort of suggests that it was a shared vehicle and pedestrian space. In terms of potential parking options to ensure that parking is retained or increased. I understand that historically there was herringbone style parking in that vicinity. Is that something which could be considered, or something which would be compatible with the master plan as it currently stated?
Through Madam Mayor, yes, I understand there was some angled parking at some point in the past. Such an approach wouldn't be compatible with the draft master plan as it's presented to council tonight. The draft master plan is providing for the closure of the eastbound lane between Guildford and Wilson Street. At the moment, one can't turn right from Guildford because travelling in a southerly direction can turn left. But what we find is most vehicles would turn left at Wilson Street, which is a couple of metres before you get to that other intersection. So as a result, the area marked 20 on the plan, being that northern or eastbound lane, carries very little traffic. It does certainly accommodate some car parking, but we feel that's more than made up in other areas in the town centre, most notably in close proximity to this site at number 23 there on Wilson Street, as well as the abundance of parking on Old Perth Road itself. Keeping in mind that new developments would need to provide its own parking facility as well, so it doesn't need to rely wholly on the public realm. But in terms of the question, the angled parking would not be compatible with the draft master plan as it's currently before council.
And so that closed lane is to be dedicated entirely to pedestrians and al fresco?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
With the indulgence of councillors, can I ask a follow-up question as a consequence of Councillor Polifka's question? This town centre master plan, would it be fair to say that that will require subsequent bodies of work to be done, including perhaps traffic assessment and parking assessment around that area should this master plan be passed? Would that be a fair assessment or not?
Through you, Madam Mayor, broadly yes, certainly the first part, would it require subsequent bodies of work? Absolutely. We've spoken about, at the very least, a precinct structure plan for the town centre, which is a more statutory tool than the sort of the master plan, but there's also a council resolution requiring a landscape concept for Bick Reserve. There'd need to be detailed designs done up for the straightening out of Old Perth Road to Surrey Street. So yes, there would certainly be subsequent bodies of work following any decision the council makes tonight. Whether that work is required to be informed by detailed traffic studies, that is something we're currently in discussions with the department about in terms of confirming with them exactly what specific technical information they require. So it may well be that we do require detailed traffic modelling and traffic studies, but we're yet to have that confirmed by the department.
Councillor Blifka.
Ties into that as well. I mean, the timing of the precinct plan, when is the ideal time for that to occur? I mean, should that be happening simultaneously with the town centre master plan, or should that happen between the town centre master plan and LPS 11, or if it happens after LPS 11, how far or how long after that time should we have such a plan in place?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it certainly won't be in conjunction with the master plan because we are at the last stop tonight, and it's recommended the council adopt the plan this evening. Obviously, there is also the strategy and scheme process that is involving a lot of liaison with the department, but broadly, it would be a case of if council adopts this plan tonight, we would continue our discussions with the department about agreeing on exactly what is required to support a precinct structure plan, and I'd suggest that information will be compiled and brought back to council in preparation for the 22-23 budget. And it may well be, depending on the information required, the significant funds need to be allocated to that project.
And that was, would that potentially be outsourced, or is that something which could happen in-house?
Through Madam Mayor, I suggest the land use planning components could be done in-house and could be coordinated in-house, but if it's going to require specialist inputs, traffic studies, economic modelling, whatever else is required, that would likely be outsourced.
Thank you.
Councillor Ames.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And through Madam Mayor to the administration, I want to just draw your attention to the public statement that's been provided by Jeff Dennis at the Swan Districts Football Club regarding the opportunity at Parcel 7 and the club's, I suppose, discussion around mixed use at that parcel. I, for one, have raised this on a number of occasions just because of the confusion and the updatedness of those town centre master plans in and around that parcel. I'm definitely not someone that wants to extend this out for so long, as some of the residents have already identified this evening here as well. But your comment, Mr Gibson, at the briefing meeting last week regarding wanting to have mixed use and commercial up through the spine of the town centre master plan, obviously in the Old Perth Road precinct. There's currently commercial entities sparsed all around the town of Bassendean. And I just wanted to confirm why the club, why the town would not be in agreement with, I suppose, approving any type of, I suppose, mixed-use opportunities. And I refer to Mr Dennis's comment at the bottom of that page, where they envisaged the mixed use would be including businesses that align to the club's operations, the building development, and also align with the town's future requirements. So from my perspective, I believe the Swan Districts Footy Club are in full agreement with how the town centre master plan will likely be rolled out within the town of Bassendean. But being a very large stakeholder from, I suppose, the council, the town's perspective, would there be any opportunity to discuss the term mixed use, which currently relies around community engagement as well as residential, to also include, I suppose, the mixed use, which in different terms also means commercial entities as well. So just a comment regarding, okay, we've got mixed use area already down there. Why would the redevelopment not be able to continue that in the parcel 7 of the Town Centre Master Plan?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's certainly open to council to provide the club what they ask for. I suppose staff have been quite consistent in this matter in that any commercial opportunities that are provided away from the Old Perth Road spine will potentially undermine the viability and likelihood of those same uses or similar uses actually appearing in the core Old Perth Road High Street area. So staff are of the view that we want to make that Old Perth Road High Street as an attractive a proposition as possible, and allowing uses that would be quite acceptable in a town centre to be located more on the fringe will simply reduce the likelihood that they will be located in the town centre. That said, if council wants to allow commercial development on Guildford Road, where the club currently has their conditional title, it's certainly possible, but there will likely be practical implications for the Old Perth Road precinct.
So can I just seek to clarify, because you just made the comment that if the town seeks to allow those uses, my understanding is that the club has the conditional freehold on that site for the use of football, so it wouldn't necessarily be the town's decision what they could use that site for beyond football?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's correct. I suppose the town's decision, in the context of the town's decision, it is the master plan. That's what is for council tonight. The conditional parcel allocated to the football club is indeed conditional. It comes with parameters about its use that would ultimately be presided over by the Minister for Lands. In addition, it reserves Parks and Recreation under the Metropolitan Region scheme. So there's a couple of planning layers there that would need some attention to enable a full redevelopment. But certainly in terms of the Deputy Mayor's comment, it's a conditional title and therefore there's conditions that need to be satisfied as set out by the Minister.
Councillor Ames.
Thank you for that, Madam Deputy Mayor, and also Mr Gibson. I just want to rehash your comment, Mr Gibson, regarding the word escapes me about what you said about if there were other, or if there were the same types of commercial entities down at that site, that it would detract away from, I suppose, the viability of the Old Perth Road precinct. Do you want to expand on that as to how you believe, or the town may believe it may detract? Because just for example, there's a health and fitness studio down there. There's 2 health and fitness studios in Hawaiian. There used to be a health and fitness studio next to the fish and chip shop. So, you know, the different types of commercial entities being spread across will allow for a greater opportunity for residents to be able to access these similar types of commercial entities in the town. But I just really want to find out what your level of detracting away from the town centre would be present.
Certainly. Through Madam Mayor, typically the market would dictate how much of a certain product or service can be tolerated in an area, because if there's an oversupply, quickly someone or multiple people will fail and it'll reach the equilibrium. If there's a greater demand than the market's supplying, that will typically be resolved as well. So it's about, the market will dictate the quantity of a good or a service. What we're seeking to sort of guide and control via the master plan is the location of where those things are provided. Now, if you go for a walk along Old Perth Road, there is a series of vacant tenancies. If those other uses that the councillor refers to didn't exist at Bassendean Oval, there is at least some chance that they would exist on the main street, particularly if there was enough demand in the community and there was enough demand for the service or the product to warrant their existence. It's just about prescribing where those things should be most appropriately located. And staff have consistently taken the view, based on feedback from this council and the last, about the highest priority being the Old Perth Road High Street. That said, if council does wish to provide for some commercial development on the conditional title, it is able to do that. I would say, however, that aspect has never been consulted upon as part of this process. So if council wants to make that decision, it would be making it without the benefit of having asked the community the question.
Councillor Ames.
Thanks for that, Mr. Gibson. So if that's the case, is it a scenario that, firstly, we can decide upon that now? Is it a scenario that is a motion to be moved this evening by council? Or is it a scenario where we adopt what is up for discussion this evening, and that's a discussion to have with the community engagement opportunity post the town centre master plan and the officer's recommendation today or this evening?
Through you, Madam Mayor, staff's preference would certainly be the latter, that council adopt this plan in the format that is in the agenda tonight. If there is an appetite from councillors to revisit aspects of it at some future point, that can be scoped and facilitated, or it is also a matter that can be advanced by the club if they wish to discuss with the minister about their conditional title and what is possible. They could advocate on their own behalf at the appropriate time without actually changing the master plan.
Councillor Ames. I will then ask Councillor Polifka one question.
No dramas at all. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I believe that there's been discussion between the town and the football club to sort of come together and have a chat about the stuff that we might be talking about here in chambers, as well as the development and everything we do with the town centre master plan as it's gone. Would it be advisable to maybe have those discussions before making any rock solid decisions this evening? I direct that question to yourself, Mr. Gibson, or to the CEO, or to yourself, Madam Mayor.
I would concur with Mr. Gibson in terms of his comments. Certainly those discussions have been had previously as part of a business case development, and the advice that Mr. Gibson has provided this evening was provided 18 months, 2 years ago. Thank you.
Councillor Polifka.
Thank you.
Sorry, it took me a while to get to you.
No, not a problem. So in terms of uses that the football club would currently enjoy, when you say it's restricted to football, potentially, there are, I think, examples of allied health uses. There's a gymnasium. You may well, at some point in the future, say, well, if they have a, I suppose, more expanded site, would it be appropriate to have things such as physio, podiatry, those sorts of things? So things which do relate to sport wouldn't necessarily find their way onto the high street, which seems to be more restaurants and retail. Would it be possible to offer some form of restricted commercial use to the football club, which is probably consistent with the use to which they would put their building in any event? We might be getting excited about something which they don't even want to do.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's, like I said, certainly possible, but I would certainly adopt the view that a physio on the main street would not at all be out of place. And how much of a link the football club facilities to a medical service, whether it's one and the same, I would suggest not. Whether it's a chiropractor, or physio, any other medical provider could just as easily and be appropriately located in the town centre. Again, that said, if council wanted to provide some limited or not so limited commercial opportunities, it is certainly within council's decision-making power tonight.
How would we do that? How would we limit the uses to which they could put their facility?
Through Madam Mayor, I'd suggest they would need to be cited and specified in on the recommendation that, for example, the council effectively proceed with the staff recommendation, but in component 1, where it says adopts the draft town centre master plan for Bassendean town centre, it would be subject to the following changes being made, with presumably a notation going on one or more of the plans to provide for some element of commercial development depending on council's appetite for.
Look, I'm confident we have the ability and the room to do that, but the question might be, well, would a month give us a bit more scope to do that? Is that, if we were to be refining things, is that something which could occur within the month, if need be?
Through Madam Mayor, it could occur within the month, but again, the staff recommendation would be to firmly adopt the plan before council tonight, but it is open to council to require changes either via a resolution tonight or via a subsequent consideration.
Thank you.
If you don't mind, councillors, I'd like to follow up on this line of questions. I'm aware that new councillors perhaps have not got a complete overview of some of the planning throughout the town. In particular, what comes to mind for me is the Eden Hill site and you know, the potential for that site to be developed into shopping and mixed use as well. So following on from some of the comments from some of the councillors, is there potential to provide information to councillors if I'm reading this correctly, if this is deferred until the December meeting, is there potential to provide councillors with information that's pertinent to why the staff believe mixed use should be confined to certain areas? Does it relate to the level of population that we've got as opposed to the level of mixed use that you want to see as a planner in this town? There are all these questions coming to mind now. So I suppose my question to you, Mr. Gibson, is would a couple of more weeks be problematic to allow councillors to tease out some of these details that seem to be coming to the surface now?
Through Madam Mayor, I suppose that is a decision for council. However, I would make the point that this has been through 3 thorough consultation phases. This plan is a reflection of the community's aspirations for the town centre as distinct from staffs or councillors. It has always been a community-led exercise, and that is what Development WA strongly suggested the town embark upon before we started this process some 18 months ago. Staff still strongly recommend the plan be adopted. If there is a desire to revisit elements of the Swan District's site, that is something that could be dealt with at a later stage through a separate process, being the precinct structure plan itself, or it could be an advocacy piece on the part of the club, or it can be assessed by the town if and when the club is able to secure a development partner for the site. So this is a guiding document, it is not the last stop in the process. It will inform subsequent steps, and apart from a request from the football club, the community that is being consulted for this process has not called broadly for commercial floor space on the conditional title. Like I say, there are subsequent steps, and if it is something council really wants to review and have the option of facilitating, there will be subsequent steps where that will be able to occur.
Okay. Further questions, councillors? Councillor McWilliam.
Madam Mayor, I wonder if I could ask Mr. Gibson, in relation to the Town Centre Master Plan, from the very beginning of this exercise, it's been going on for over a year now, and was based on an earlier massive consultation with the town, the community. The whole idea of the Town Centre Master Plan is to provide a concept plan from which will be drawn information put into a prospectus, which will then be broadly distributed to interested developers, made available to people who are looking for a wonderful place to live and raise children, and to actually lift opportunities for additional residential zoning and heritage areas and other beautifications around the place that is the town of Bassendean. So as a concept plan, it is not set in absolute concrete. that this is based on the feedback from the community, which has been extensive. Am I correct in this assumption? Sorry, just been asking the question.
Thank you.
Very
I was just going to ask where the question was.
Just there.
Following the debate.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, quite correct. It will serve for the advocacy and promotion. It will serve us well in terms of talking to the state government about their potential involvement in development of Crown land parcels, and it will also inform the subsequent statutory tools, being, amongst other things, the precinct structure plan. So, whilst council can adopt this in a form tonight, ideally, it will not fetter council's decision making later when it considers a precinct structure plan, which is a prescribed process under the regs.
With the indulgence of councillors, I've actually got a few questions as well. Now, Mr. Gibson, we had a telephone conversation this morning about this particular item, and I have consistently asked how we can encourage the best type of development in the town. Is it correct that there will be a period of time? I asked this question last week, but for the benefit of the audience, there will be a period of time from potential adoption of this town centre master plan to the creation of a structure plan. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that's correct.
And that timeline, I'm given to understand, would be approximately 2 years?
Through you, Madam Mayor, as I said in response to one of the previous queries, we are currently scoping out the task of preparing the precinct structure plan. That will likely result in the matter being brought to council via the budget process for the 22-23 financial year. And depending on what inputs are required by the department, that will influence what we suggest council needs to budget for. Obviously, the more inputs required, the longer it will take and the more expensive it will be. But using 2 years as a starting point is probably a fair assumption at this stage.
Okay. So following on from that, during our discussion this morning, I asked, for instance, there was some public commentary about the heights of site, for example, site 2 and site 7, which is the Wilson Street car park and the Swan District's football club site. And those heights on these plans are marked at 8 to 10 stories. So my question this morning was that if those heights were reduced to, say, 6 to 8 stories, what would happen if a developer came forward with an application for, say, a 10-storey development in that site? Would that be considered, and how would that be considered under Town Planning Scheme 10 first, would it not?
Through to Madam Mayor, if it was submitted in the next couple of years, it would very likely be Town Local Planning Scheme number 10. Both those sites are particularly interesting from that perspective because one is reserved as local open space under the scheme and one is reserved as parks and recreation under the Metropolitan Region scheme. So the Swan District's football club site is parks and recreation under the Regis scheme, so there's an extra layer of difficulty and complexity for that site. Whereas the Wilson Street car park behind us is urban under the Metropolitan Region scheme, but it is local open space under the local scheme. The staff recommendation contained at point 3 is that it recommends that council adopt a flexible view on the application of statutory standards in the event that an application comes in that might resonate with the master plan and might be broadly consistent with what council adopts through the master plan, but is at odds with the scheme, that council be open-minded and potentially flexible in terms of the application of the standards with a view to possibly supporting the application, noting of course that in many, if not most instances, it would actually need to go to the Planning Commission for determination, and the Planning Commission may well not support it, but at least for what the town can reasonably control, and what council can control, staff are recommending that the town and council adopt a reasonably proactive and practical view of the framework as opposed to a very bureaucratic view.
Okay, so coming to the comments this morning that we had, I requested that if those two sites were reduced down to 6 to 8 stories and a developer wanted to develop up to 10 stories, would that encourage some better design outcomes in the absence of having that structure plan in place? Would you like to articulate what your response was to that this morning?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the response was probably more broad than just those two sites, but across the area, to say that if a proposal was broadly in line with the master plan, it should be able to expect a smoother passage through the assessment and determination system. If an application came in that was a bit more audacious in terms of what it was proposing, in terms of height, bulk, scale, whatever, and it was beyond what was contemplated in the master plan, that would not in itself be a fatal flaw to the application, but it would require the decision maker, be that council or the JDAP, to consider whether the departure from the master plan is justified, whether it was going to have an unreasonable impact on the area. In terms of good development, I suppose that is a fairly empty term in isolation, but I would say that State Planning Policy 7.3, which deals with residential development in the state, does, as it relates to apartment development, takes a very much a performance based approach as opposed to a rigid sort of binary checkbox arrangement, and it is incumbent on a proponent to basically justify how their proposal meets the stated design principles. That process, staff will undertake that assessment, but that process is strengthened by the application needing to go to the design review panel. And that design review panel, I think it's LPP 9 from memory, that sets out that applications in the town centre would go to the DRP for assessment and review. And any comment or recommendation that came out of the DRP would obviously form part of the decision-making process and may influence the ultimate decision made. So there are a couple of protections there to ensure that any proposal is properly assessed and anything that has been approved satisfies the requirements of SPP 7.3.
Councillor Polifka.
Just following on from that, concerning the heights. So when we specify a height in the town centre master plan, so take that Wilson site, where we say 8 to 10, what assumption are we making in terms of the footprint of that building, and how does that then feed into the plot ratios that we're prepared to allow people? Because from my perspective, a 10-storey building that occupies a quarter of the lot, probably better than a 5-storey building that fills the entire lot. So just what is the underlying assumption in terms of the footprint of the building at the 8 to 10 stories on Wilson Street?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I suppose given that it's a conceptual master plan, it doesn't go into that level of sort of granular detail about what specific coding it would be. That would be a task to be undertaken likely through the precinct structure plan. But broadly, in terms of Councillor Polifka's comment, that is correct, is that if buildings are going to be higher, more vertical, you would expect that they would be less expansive in terms of the footprint. Those two sites were chosen for the 8 to 10 story range on the basis that they don't have any direct interface with existing residential. There was, in the case of Wilson Street, a bit of a topographical lull, a bit of a low spot there, so the 8 to 10 stories wouldn't be as impactful as if it was on a hill. They both sat sort sort of at each end of the town centre, kind of neatly bookended the town centre, and would provide opportunities for sort of landmark development at both entrance points. So, whilst it's certainly open to council to drop the height if it so chose, I think the consultation didn't raise vehement objection in terms of the heights. It was still broadly supported, and staff are comfortable in recommending that those heights be adopted, noting of course that any application for development approval at some point in the future would still need to go for the SPP 7.3 and design review panel checkpoint.
Yeah, follow-on question to that. So, I mean, if it were the case that the 10 stories is premised on the footprint being as large as it could be, will we get the situation where a developer will say, well, on that basis, you were going to give us this plot ratio, we're going to shrink the footprint to a quarter of what it is, so we're going to go up 4 times as high while still maintaining the same plot ratio. Is that an argument which we would potentially have to face, and how would we stop that from occurring? Because I don't think anyone wants a 40-storey building.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we could be faced with absolutely anything, but that is already the case. We don't control what applications are lodged. We can only control how they're assessed, and in many cases how they're determined. If we were confronted, if we, being the town council or even a JDAP on behalf of the council, was confronted with a 40-storey building in lieu of a master plan that says 10, the onus would certainly be on the applicant of the 40-storey building to explain why a 40-storey building is not much more of a departure, or not a meaningful departure from a 10-storey building. It's not to say that it would be accepted or otherwise, but the decision maker would need to have regard to the town centre master plan and any other framework that existed at the time to say, well, if the framework says this and they are well wide of that, is that an appropriate and acceptable variation in that location? Depending on the specifics of any particular proposal, the answer could well be yes, but that would be a individualised assessment as supported by the design review.
Yeah, I just raise that because I have seen plot ratio used in that way before with unintended consequences.
Councillors, further questions? So we have before us an officer's recommendation. Subsequent to my conversation with Mr. Gibson this morning, I did propose a slight amendment to dot point 3. But I probably would also wish to add another dot point requesting a reduction in the heights of sites 2 and 4. I'm aware that I haven't discussed this with other councillors. And so there are several options available to us tonight. My first question is, would anyone like to move the officer's recommendation as is? Alternatively, I will move the officer's recommendation with the amendments that I have just mentioned.
I'm happy to move the officer recommendation with your first amendment, but not with the second amendment.
Okay, I can second what Councillor McLennan is prepared to advance.
Okay. So we have Councillor McLennan moving the officer's recommendation with my slight amendment to dot point 3, and I'll just read that out for the public. It is the officer's recommendation as is, with an addition to the end that states, and any comments and or recommendations provided by the town's design review panel. Do we have anyone against? Okay, I'll put that to
Just in terms of that, if there was anyone that wanted to move amendments, would that be the time for them to do so, if they were minded to do so?
Sorry, I didn't hear.
In terms of amendments, if somebody wanted to move one, would it be the appropriate time for them to do so?
Are there any other amendments?
I'm not suggesting one for myself, just so that people have the opportunity before we vote on this.
So I'll ask Councillor Ames.
Just going on with my conversations regarding parcel 7, would there be any opportunity to put an amendment in there that there would be consideration for flexibility of what goes on parcel 7 moving into the future? I wholeheartedly accept everything else that's on the council's or the officer's recommendation, but how would we word that? And
well, that would be subject to the mover accepting that.
Sure.
I'm not willing to accept that, so it would need to go to a specific debate around that item.
So, okay. First of all, if you're wanting debate on that, Councillor Ames, you would have to put some wording around that so it can be debated.
And have a seconder for the...
And have a seconder as well. So I'll just give you a few minutes to create some words around that, and then we'll see if you can get a seconder for that that amendment. Councillor Ames. Sorry. Councillor McLeod.
Are you seeking to understand the next procedure?
I can't hear you.
Are you seeking to understand the next procedure in the meeting?
I was seeking to understand if it should be put to the vote that you have actually moved and it's been seconded with the amendment.
So my understanding, Mayor, is that as an amendment has been proposed, if Councillor Ames receives a seconder, then the amendment will be debated, and if that's successful, it will become part of the substantive motion, which then we can debate.
I was seeking to understand, given that you had refused to accept that proposal. So, Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd also like to throw an amendment up there to say that the council considers the opportunity for a selected mixed-use opportunity at parcel 7 as outlined within the town centre master plan.
Okay. We have a seconder. Councillor Polifka. You're seconding?
Yeah, happy to do so.
So do we have councillors against? Okay, so we go into debate. So Councillor Ames, would you like to open debate on that? Would you like to have the gentleman read it again?
No, I just didn't see who was against because I was looking down. I didn't hear it an A. Councillor McLennan was against?
Yes.
Everyone else was for?
Not yet. Okay, Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Howard, being a long-term resident of the town of Bassendean, and knowing what opportunities there are within the town of Bassendean and its commercial entities, I foresee that any type of opportunity within Parcel 7 down at the Swan Districts Football Club would be very advantageous to the town. Definitely, from my perspective, won't detract from what great opportunities will happen within our town centre along Old Perth Road. With the increase in population that the town centre master plan is going to, definitely support, I suppose, the opportunity for greater increases of small local businesses that might be in conjunction with, the sporting precinct down at the Swan District Football Club would be very advantageous. As Officer Gibson said, that we've got opportunities where we've got physiotherapy that potentially could be the town centre. That would be fantastic. There's a strong advocacy of health, wellness, in and around mental health opportunities, inclusivity, integrated opportunities down at the football club. That's only going to get greater, which will then further increase community engagement within the town of Bassendean. And I foresee that we can't fit everything up and down the Old Perth Road precinct, even though we would like to. I think there's a great opportunity that for any type of sport, fitness, mental health, inclusivity, business opportunity down within the Swan Districts Football Club area would be of high advantage to not only the Swan District Football Club, but more importantly to the town and to the residents that are going to be already in the town, but also that are going to be coming to the town for events, sporting opportunities, inclusivity, and everything that's been outlined down at the Swan District Football Club. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Anthony. Councillor Politica.
Reserve, if I may.
Councillor McLean.
Thank you. So thank you, Councillor Ames. I completely appreciate that the football club is a really important part of our town, and we all want the club to be sustainable and to remain an important feature of our town long into the future. However, the priority of this project is the vibrancy and the sustainability of the town centre as a whole, and I don't think we should be considering one group over and above the rest of the users of our town centre, being the residents, the businesses, the other community groups, schools, and so forth. We've consulted very widely on this. There's been extensive engagement. At no time up until very recently was that specifically put forward by the club. I think it's fair to say that we have accommodated all of the club's requests, even those that have been made right at the last minute, and we've been happy to do so. However, this is not something that we have taken to our community, and as the staff have clearly said, potentially it's going to detract from the ability of our town centre to attract some of these businesses. And walking up and down Old Perth Road, we all know that we are in desperate need of encouraging development and commercial activity in our town centre, and we would be remiss if we were discouraging that by providing another opportunity at this stage. As the staff have identified, this in no way precludes in future. It's open to the club to go and advocate for this at a later stage. There are other options for the club to be sustainable. So if they attract a developer for their site with 8 to 10 stories above them, that's going to deliver the club with good negotiations to some new facilities. They could possibly negotiate to retain 1 or 2 of the apartments and have an ongoing income stream from renting out those apartments. So I would like to encourage councillors to adopt the town centre master plan as has been consulted on by the community, and that discussion about what could go into that site could happen at a later stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Any councillors against? For? Okay. Councillor Politica.
Yeah. So in terms of what we're looking to do.
Councillor Politica, you reserved your right to speak.
There's no one for, so I was exercising that right. I consider if somebody was in favour of it.
No, that's fine. I just was trying to.
Yeah. So in terms of what we're looking to do there, I mean, it's opening up the possibilities for the football club. I mean, I don't necessarily see it in the way that if we have more opportunities, so more spaces which are dedicated for these sorts of things, that will necessarily mean that will come at the expense of other parts of the town. And I see it as growing the pie for everyone. I mean, making more opportunity in Bassendean, and that the competition isn't between different locations within Bassendean. It's Bassendean against other local government areas. We want to have as much potential as possible, so as many people as possible come to our town centre, which, as we heard from the creative communities, was essentially in a dumbbell configuration where the pub at one end and the football club at another. And that's how it was described. And so I would subscribe to that view of things, that we do need to have both those as very strong draw cards for the town. Whilst we're not explicitly saying what the football club can or can't do on these sites, what we are doing is what we would be doing if people vote in favour of this, is signalling to the football club as a council that, look, our door's open. Come and have a chat to us, tell us what your aspirations are, what it is that you're trying to achieve. As long as those things are reasonable, then, so I can't speak on behalf of council, but council will give you a fair hearing, and you may well get that, as long as it's not unreasonable, what you're asking for. So it's just to signal that we are open for business, not just with developers from afar, but also for long-standing institutions within the town, such as the Swan Districts Football Club. So it's just if we can assist them in a way which doesn't diminish anyone else, then why wouldn't we do everything that we could to ensure that the club flourishes? So that's why I would be supportive of what's being proposed.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Any councillors? Councillor Wilding?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I thank Councillor Ames for his amendment to the proposal. I want to echo Councillor McLennan's comments regarding the football club having ample time to consider such a proposal and adding it to the master plan. To include it at the 11th hour undermines the whole point of ongoing community consultation. And while the football club is welcome to bring it in a separate process and have the master plan amended to reflect that, it should go through the same process that any other resident or any other club should have to go through, in terms of the adequate amount of time for the community to consider the proposal, to comment on the proposal, and for councillors to consider the proposal as well. So I'd encourage the football club, if they are keen to pursue this as a use for the site, to undertake that process as any other group would.
Any other councillors? I would like to speak against this item. Echoing some of the thoughts already expressed, my belief is that this has not been included in the community consultation thus far. So that's my main objection, that we would be changing something that has gone through community consultation. I'm also aware from the comments by the officers that the club being on a title, they can indeed, after a certain process, apply to incorporate mixed use. And I think at that point in time, that would be a more appropriate time to consider this matter, because there would also obviously be public consultation at that time to comment on whether that's acceptable to the surrounding residents. I also understand that the planning officers are providing us with advice based on their extensive knowledge of the town, and planners are indeed, their job is to place things in the right locations so that we have cohesive development. So in that respect, at this point in time, I will take the advice of our staff and suggest that we should progress the Town Centre Master Plan in the format in which it's been put out to public consultation. And if Swan Districts come back further down the track with a proposal, it may enable better planning, in that there would be associated transport and parking incorporated into that. All mixed-use developments require a certain amount of parking, and because we don't have a proposal in front of us that actually details the type of mixed use that might be incorporated in Swan Districts, it's very difficult to understand what shortcomings might develop out of putting putting this in now. So I think that this is something that we should leave to Swan Districts to come up with a more detailed application at some stage down the, and there's a long road to go before we get to that phase. So on that basis, I'm opposing your amendment. Lastly, do we have any other speakers for or against? So I'll put that to the vote.
Sorry, just on that.
Sorry, Councillor Ames, sorry, you have right of closing.
I'll take the opportunity. It's my first time, eh? There you go. Hey, look, and it was an opportunity where if the football club does have the opportunity to be able to bring this back to the surface for council consideration, I think it would be very advantageous to the town, our councils, as Councillor Polifka was saying about how we are open for business here at the town of Bassendean, and I would like for the council to consider that opportunity as it may fall across our table come to the future. So thank you very much for listening, and good experience first up today, so thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ames. Okay, councillors, I'll put that amendment by Councillor Ames to the vote. All those for? Councillor Ames and Councillor Polifka. All those against? Councillor McLennan, McWilliam, Wilding and Hamilton. Thanks. Okay. So we go back to the original, Councillor McLennan moved the officer's recommendation with incorporating a slight amendment that I've made to point 3. So, and we have a seconder, which was Councillor McWilliam. Sorry?
Polifka.
Oh, Councillor Polifka, sorry. So do we have anyone against? So I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Got there in the end. Okay. So 12.5 is a review of various parking restrictions, Bassendean Oval. So I would ask if the officer would like to speak to this. No? Okay. Would any councillors like to ask questions on this item? Councillor Polifka.
Just in relation to the genesis of this, was there any particular resident, well not identifying them of course, but had a resident come forward and said that they wanted restrictions because they were worried about what was happening outside their property?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the advice from the Ranger Service is that they had comments and queries directed at them from time to time, and it was probably the accumulation of those queries and those complaints that led to this. But it wasn't a single person at a single site, it was more just a thread of commentary that they experienced day to day.
What was their sort of general concern, just that there were people, cars that they didn't identify or didn't recognise parked out front of their house? Was that?
Through Madam Mayor, among other things, it was that the restrictions didn't match the football season necessarily, didn't deal with the ladies' football, which is often played on a Sunday, and just the queries directed at Rangers about when matters would be reviewed to respond to those changing elements of the area. So I think in addition to that, this is just what I've been advised as part of the handover when I first started, that there may have been some discussion at a council meeting that considered a previous set of restrictions in a nearby area, and a comment may have been made at that time about our staff going to look at the parking at Bassendean Oval. So between the commentary from councillors at the time and commentary and queries from residents in the area, that prompted Rangers to undertake the review.
Sort of mild concern as opposed to a pointed request
Correct.
to sort
Yes.
this problem out in front of my house.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, councillors? Councillor McLennan, sorry.
Sorry. Mr Gibson, so the introduction of, I'm speaking specifically now of Devon Road, the proposal to include Sundays as well as Saturdays, is that just to accommodate the women's football matches specifically?
Through Madam Mayor, and any other large events that may occur at the Oval, whether it's a car show or Christmas carols, the reserve is there and is able to be hired. Obviously accommodates football for large portions of the year, but can otherwise be used by community groups or anyone else that hires it. And typically the hiring would occur on a Saturday or a Sunday, so as to cover both things.
But the primary use on the Sundays is the women's football. Okay, and do we have any indication of, it's probably in the report, I can't remember the attendance numbers for the women's football, because I understand it's significantly less than the games that are held on the Saturdays?
Through Madam Mayor, I don't have the information on hand, but I think it would be probably safe to assume it's at least somewhat lower than the attendance on Saturdays.
So just hearing some of the concerns from the residents on Devon Road about Saturdays and Sundays and a blanket approach, I understand that for that particular road the proposal is to just change the signs. Would the staff have any particular concerns if instead of a blanket all day Saturday and all day Sunday, to modify the sign so that it still was just Saturdays from 8 to 6 during the football season, so extending to, is it February to September now?
Through Madam Mayor, there's no major objection. At the very least, it would need to be March to September, but just to be safe, it might be prudent to say February to September.
Okay, thank you.
Councillors, if you, with your indulgence, can I just follow on from that? So dot point 3 deals with Devon Road. So following on from the question by Councillor McLennan, would there be any else difficulty if the signs in Devon Road were left exactly as they are?
Through Madam Mayor, that's certainly open to council to do that. I suppose, as I said before, the football season, depending on the specific fixturing, may run into September. So there may be an issue there, but if council is comfortable with the current restrictions, it can leave them unchanged.
So is there the possibility of perhaps just leaving it, okay, let me explain myself, if we resolve to implement the other parking restrictions around the Oval, and we resolve to leave Devon Road with the existing parking format, is there potential for the staff to perhaps monitor the situation and advise in, say, 12 months' time if there's any consequences to Devon Road?
Through Madam Mayor, yes, that's certainly possible.
Okay. Councillors, any other questions? So I have in front of me an amendment that's been sent through by Councillor Wilding. Councillor Wilding, would you like to move the officer's recommendation with that amendment?
Through Madam Mayor, I prefer to consider the amendment as standalone today.
Okay. I also would propose, if we move the officer's recommendation, to delete dot point number 3, which would in effect leave Devon Road in exactly the same format as what they've got now, the exact same parking format that they've got with no changes. So we have that proposal that I've put up. Do we have I'm obviously moving it, do we have a seconder? Councillor McWilliam. Okay. Do we have objections to that?
Go ahead.
Yep, okay.
Madam Mayor, I would like to move my amendment.
Okay, so we'll debate, do we have a seconder? Councillor Lennon. objections to that?
I'd just like to understand what that's actually going to do. So it's just the introduction of one parking bay, is that?
Thank you, Councillor Philip, going through you, Madam Mayor. Broadly, the intent of the motion is that with the available parking shifting, so there might not necessarily be less bays available, but the ones that are available would be further out from the oval, to investigate different options to make sure that there are always going to be accessible bays within a close radius of the oval, so that people who aren't able to traverse that extra distance can always utilise the oval in the same way they might have previously done. Noting that one bay obviously only provides access for one additional person, but the intention of requesting this to be investigated is to sort of provide a model or a pilot to see if this works, if this is something which could be expanded upon for future development.
So we have a
question.
Yes.
Could I just seek from the officers the statement just made then by Councillor Wilding that indicated that the parking would be further away from the oval. My understanding is that on the days when it's most heavily used, with the current parking restrictions, there wouldn't be a shift of available parking bays away from the current locations. Am I correct in my understanding?
Through Madam Mayor, yes, that's broadly correct. If you assume that the busiest day for parking is indeed a Saturday, associated with football games, there is an existing parking prohibition between 8 AM and 6 PM, March to August. So the prohibition, the yellow line, wouldn't add a great deal during the times of peak demand if you assume that is the football game. So there would not be any meaningful loss of parking.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have Councillor Wilding moving her alternative motion. Do we have a...
I've already seconded it.
Second?
I've already seconded it.
Right, okay. So do we have anyone against? So I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? So that becomes part of the officer recommendation. I assume that can become a new dot point 3. It was what I have moved, deletes dot point 3. And do I have, seconder was Councillor McWilliam. Okay. Do we have anyone against? Okay, so I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. So we move to item 12.6, nomination of local government members for the Metro Inner North Joint Development Assessment Panel. This is fairly straightforward. I'd ask if there's any questions on this item. Okay. So we need to have some nominations for this JDAP position. Now, my understanding is that Councillor Ames originally nominated as the deputy, so I'm assuming you would like to retain, stay in that position.
Yes, Madam Mayor, if the opportunity is there, thank you very much.
Okay, well, you've already been voting
Cool.
for that.
Yep,
So,
Can I just ask, so you were voted in as the deputy previously.
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify whether you had an interest in being the actual member or you were still happy to be the deputy.
At this point in time, Madam Deputy Mayor, just the deputy would be nice. Thank you very much.
so we have two positions. I'll call for nomination Councillor McLennan and Councillor Wilding. Thank you. Any other nominations? So I'll put that. We have a mover.
No. Yeah. Do we have a second deputy?
Yes, we need a second deputy. That's correct. Okay. Councillor McWilliam, thank you very much.
I'd like to nominate for the second deputy position.
Okay. So we have Councillor McLennan as a member of the JDAP, nominating as a member of the JDAP, Councillor Wilding nominating as a member of the JDAP, and Councillor McWilliam nominating as the second deputy of the JDAP. Okay, we have a mover for that. Councillor Wilding, seconded. Councillor Ames. Sorry?
Sorry, who was the mover, sorry?
Councillor Wilding. And seconded Councillor Ames.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone against? Put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Okay. 12.8 Draft Traffic Management Treatment Policy. Councillor Ames was voted on previously. Okay, so apparently we have to vote on Councillor Ames again because his term expires. That would be a very short term indeed.
No meetings.
Short term's a good term.
Moved Councillor McLennan, seconded Councillor Wilding. Anyone against? All those in favour?
Thank you, everyone.
That's carried unanimously.
Oh, mate, you'd be on the record as well.
Look into the
Okay.
JDAP before you thank anyone for being part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, 12.8